Hey, good to be back. Masechet Beitzah, Daf Yud Alef, Amud, Bet. We're top of Amud Bet. We were dealing the last little bit that we were dealing with was regarding shchita. Maybe let's go back to the bottom of Amud Alef. Yud Alef Amud Alef at the bottom. We saw from the two dots. So we said Beit Shammai Omrim Ein Notnin Ta'ol. We're going through these machlokot between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai regarding Simchat Yom Tov. That if you have the skin of the animal which was shechted on Yom Tov, Beit Shammai said you can't put it down in a place where people are going to walk on it. Walking on the hides is going to be good for it. That helps the beginning of the process of tanning the hides, which is one of the malachot. So therefore, Beit Shammai said you can't do that. Beit Hillel said you can. We said Tana, if we're 8 lines from the bottom of Amud Alef, Tana v'shavin shemochin alav basar litzli. We said that if you are salting meat for roasting, that you can do that on top of the hides, even though the salt's going to go down and it's going to be good for the skins as well. What is salting meat for roasting? That's not required, but that's just done for the taste. So it's a smaller amount of salt as well. So shavin shemochin alav basar litzli, Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela litzli, aval liktera lo. Rabbi said only if you're doing it for tzli, for roasting meat, but not if you're salting meat in such a way where you're going to be cooking it, where it is required. Pshita litzlitnan, says the Gemara. Obviously, that's what it said. It said for roasting. So how come Ashmalan? Tafilu litzli ke'en kedela asur. Says no. If you really like the taste of salt and you're salting the meat in such a way for roasting, it's going to be a very, very large amount of salt. That's already going to be forbidden because then you're essentially salting the hides, and that is a problem. Okay. Then we said we have the chalavim, the fats of the animal, the chaylev, which is forbidden to eat. It is permitted for benefit, though. You could use it to burn it as a candle, etc. So you want to get it in such a way that it's not going to go all disgusting. So you could, so says the Gemara, no, you cannot salt the chaylev on Yom Tov, and you can't mapchin bahem, is to sort of air them out, leave them in different, turn them over, different directions, so the air gets in, so it's not going to go all rotten. And because this is not for ochel nefesh, because you're not going to be eating it. Mishum Rabbi Yoshua Mushotran Baruch Agabei Tedot. Rabbi Yoshua said there is a way to air them out if you hang them up on poles and hang them up on hooks like that. So Marav Matna Alachak Rabbi Yoshua, Ikadamri Marav Matna Ein Alachak Rabbi Yoshua. Rav Matna said, according to one version, halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua. According to another version, halacha is not like Rabbi Yoshua. Bishlam Alaman Damar Alachak Rabbi Yoshua, Itztrich. I understand the one who says that he has to come and say halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua, because we have Yachid and Rabbim, and generally speaking, we'd say halacha like Rabbim. So to tell us that we follow the Dat Yachid. The one who says, the version that says Rav Matna came and taught us, Rabbi Yoshua, well, that's obvious. Why do I need you to tell me that? Yachid Rabim Malachak Rabim, right? So Ma'odatayma, you would have thought Mistaber Tamed Rabbi Yoshua. You would have thought the reasoning of Rabbi Yoshua makes sense. His svara is very good. Why? Because we say the ilo sharit le'mimna v'lo shachet. Okay, this is what's going to be the next sugya, the next Amud. This is essentially the principle we're going to be talking about. Ula is going to introduce us to a concept of hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan. That something is allowed at the end of a process, even though that itself is not needed for Simchat Yom Tov or for whatever reason. But if we don't allow you to do what is done at the end, something is going to be ruined, then you won't come to do it in the first place. So he says, yeah, if we don't allow, the svara was, if we don't allow him to air out these chalavim, so he's going to have a big monetary loss from shechting this animal on Yom Tov, he's not going to do it in the first place, and he's not going to therefore engage in Simchat Yom Tov. He's not going to have his meat for his meal. So that's what we would have thought. We would have thought that's right, even though Rabbi Yoshua is Dait Yachid saying that, we'd have thought that svara overpowers it. So it comes to teach you, no, halacha does not follow him. Now, the question is, Ma'ishna me'olef lifnei adolsan. Right, because according to the opinion that says we don't hold like Rabbi Yeshua, you're saying like this. You're saying if you killed an animal on Yom Tov, you cannot do anything to air out the chaylev in order to benefit from it afterwards. However, you can, according to Beit Hillel, place the skin in a place where people are going to walk on it, and that's the beginning of the tanning of the hides. So therefore, what do you see? That Beit Hillel allowed, in that case, with the or lifnei adosan, they allowed it. And here, regarding the chalavim, we don't allow it. But both of them are for the same purpose. But the svara behind both would be so that you aren't prevented from Simchat Yom Tov in the first place. If you tell people they're not going to be able to preserve the skins, they won't shecht. You tell them they can't preserve the chaylev, they won't shecht. But we have a different din in each case. So answers the Gemara now, the top of Amud Bet. It says, Hatam lo muchach milta. Mishum dechazi lemizga alei. Over there, with the skins, what Beit Hillel said, there, so it's not muchach milta. It's not certain. It's not clear that the only reason it's allowed is because of rahitir sofan mishum tchilatan. Meaning, there's more of a svara over there to say it's allowed. Mishum dechazi lemizga, because you could already sit on these hides. They would use them as a sort of a carpet, a couch, whatever it is, and therefore it's not, technically speaking, not necessarily muktzah, and therefore it's allowed. But hacha. But over here, with airing out these pieces of fat of chaylev, atila meimra, people, if you allow that, so people will come to say the following: if you're going to say the Rabbanan allowed it in such a way so that it won't get disgusting, so that it will preserve it, so they allowed it. They allowed it. Mali lemishtachinu, mali lemimlachinu. People will say, what difference does it make if I'm going to lay it out? Or hang it up, or if I'm going to salt it, and therefore people come to salt it, and that is something which Rabbanan did not allow. So that's why over here it's more machmer. Now, speaking of salting, the Gemara now has another halacha. It says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Moleach Adam kama chatichot basar bevat achat, af al pi she'eno tzarich ela lachatira achat. Okay, so this is a very interesting halacha. Here we're going to get into the realm of ha'arama, which is essentially, we say the following. As we've said many times, and we'll see many more times throughout the Masechet, melachot on Yom Tov, melechet ochel nefesh, is going to be permitted. The melacha that is needed in the direct preparation of food, that is allowed to be done on Yom Tov. Which preparation of food? Food that you're eating on Yom Tov. Right. That's why I think I mentioned last time that the chalukah, according to some of the Rishonim, is between the melacha that's done in the kitchen versus the melacha that's done in the field. That which is done in the field that we don't allow. That which is done in the kitchen we do allow. It's for direct food preparation. It's for the food that you need now. We don't say, Chachamim were worried that we find some Chol HaMoed as well. That if we say today you have a day of work and today you can do the melacha or chanefesh, people say, okay, I've got the whole of Yom Tov. I don't have time during the week to make supper, to cook, whatever it is. I'm going to spend the whole of Yom Tov cooking, fill up the freezer, right, with all the food. No, that is completely forbidden. If you have food that you made for Yom Tov, on Yom Tov, and you have some, and you thought you would need it all, and you have some left over, okay, you don't have to throw it away. That you can eat during the week or whatever it is. But to cook milakatchila for the weekday, for Chol, that is completely forbidden on Yom Tov. So here, what's our case? Our case is you only need one piece of meat. You only need one piece of meat, but you have all the different pieces of meat. You're only going to eat one on Yom Tov. You're going to have a small meal. What do you do with the rest? If you don't salt it now, it's going to go to waste. So Amar Rav Yehuda Mashma, Moleach Adam kama chatichot basar bevat achat. You can salt a number of pieces of meat at one time, in one go. Af al pi she'eino tzarech ela lachatira achat. Even though you only need one. Now Rashi here says bevat achat. He says, the chad tircha lekulu. Okay, there's only one tircha. There's only one sort of action that you're doing. If you start off, if the way that you're doing it, there's only one thing you have to do. So even though you're going to end up salting all the pieces of meat, though you only needed one, that is permitted. Later on, the Gemara will tell us, for example, you can fill up a pot of water. You want to fill up a pot of boiling water, even though you only need 1 cup on Yom Tov. You can do that because you fill it up, but it's chad tircha. It's only one thing that you do to fill up. If you already have water in the pot, and then you take it from the stove and you go fill it up, and then you take it back and you go fill it up again, that would be a problem. Or if you're cooking, so if you're cooking in such a way that it's only one action, you put the whole thing, you put the whole chicken into the pot, and then you cook it, even though you're only going to eat some of it. So that's fine. But if you're, let's say, a person's frying schnitzels, but each schnitzel that you fry is going to be a different action. It's a different, it's a different tircha. And then with each one, but you know you only need one of them, so then that would be forbidden. Okay, so the first way to do it, he says, if it's done in such a way that it's b'chad tircha, you're salting everything at once. Let's say you're pouring the meat into the salt. I don't know. Then it's fine that you're salting all the meat, because even though you only need one, but that's permitted. So says Rav Ada bar Ahava ma'arim umalach garma garma. Okay, so alternative way to do this, Rav Ada bar Ahava says you can do ma'arim. Ma'arim, difficult word to translate, but essentially harama. We talk about harama. It's sort of like a loophole. Like a loophole in halacha, meaning when we do something which is not strictly speaking what we need, but it's within there's room within the law to allow it. So what is he saying? He's saying the way that you ma'arim over here is malach garma garma, meaning you salt the pieces one at a time. Salt the pieces one at a time. Wait a minute, we just said you only need one of them. You're going to salt more than one. That's going to be forbidden. You're doing it for the weekday purpose. So says Rashi, ma'arim. So what do? He says like this. You take the first piece of meat and you salt it. You say, this is the piece that I want to eat today, so I need to salt it. Now, once it's already salted, then what do? So then you say, you say, wait a minute, that piece of meat looks better. Okay, so I'm going to take that one. So now you take that one and you salt it. You finish salting that, you say, actually, that piece of meat. Okay, so clearly this is ha'arama. The question is, the question is, why should this be allowed? Why should this be allowed? Because later on, we in fact have, the Gemara says explicitly that when it comes to food, when it comes to cooking, this is brought in, it's brought in the Poskim, it's brought in the Shulchan Aruch, that a person is not allowed to be ma'arim for the food that they cook on Yom Tov, right? This actually comes up. It can come up quite common. Nowadays, it's maybe less common to cook on Yom Tov, but certainly heating up food is what we do. And let's say you have food which is liquid, etc., soup, for example. On Shabbat, you wouldn't be allowed on Shabbat morning to take the soup and heat it up, because that is cooking. Okay, without getting now into all the technicalities of bishul achar bishul, for solid, for liquid, etc. But generally speaking, we hold that if you have liquid food to heat that up, when it started off cold, that would be considered cooking. So on Shabbat, that would be forbidden. On Yom Tov, it would be permitted. Yom Tov, you can heat up your soup, heat up your food. What happens? So in Chutz La'aretz, it's far more common when you have 2 days of Yom Tov or 3 days of Yom Tov, right, adjacent to Shabbat. In Israel, here we have on Rosh Hashanah. So a person wants to heat up the food for the second day, or for the meal for the second night. But if you're going to wait already until nightfall, etc., so it's already it's going to be very late. By the time it gets hot, it's going to be you're going to have to wait for your meal. So people want to do it earlier in the day. You want it ready in the afternoon. So that would also be preparation, but that would also be cooking from one day of Yom Tov to the next. And that's not something that's allowed, because we learned at the beginning of the Masechet, we consider the 2 days separate days. One of them is really chol versus kodesh, etc. So if a person says, so if it's harama, in the sense that, let's say a person puts their soup onto the hot plate on the afternoon and says, okay, I'm going to have a spoon of soup. That's why I'm heating it up, but and then I'll eat it for my meal tonight. So you're not really heating it up to have the spoon of soup. You're trying to do it. That's a form of harama. That's going to be problematic. If the case where it could be allowed, let's say you have young children in the house or grandchildren, and you want to give them a supper already on the day that's the first day of Yom Tov, before it gets dark. So then there would be no problem. You're heating up the soup on that day in order to give them the food. You're going to keep it on the hot plate, and then it will be warm already when second day Yom Tov comes in. That case as well, that's what we said before. That's chad tircha. You're only doing one action to heat it up or to cook it. Okay, but in our case, That's not what we're saying. This is very clearly Arama. It says Rav Ada bar Avi, you take one piece and you salt it, and then you put it down, and then you take another piece and salt it, each one. So why is that allowed? So we'll see later on, if you skip, fast forward a little bit to Daf Yud Zayin. Daf Yud Zayin Amud Bet, there's a Rashi that addresses this point. And Yud Zayin Amud Bet, Rashi near the top, it's the fourth, I think, Dibur HaMatchil over there, where the Gemara there says, Im Herim Asur, talks about how Harama is forbidden. So he says, Le'echol, Te'ichmul Abanan, Beha Milta, Shelo La'akol Tolat Eruv, etc. Okay, so this is related to Eruv Tavshilin. I'm not going to get into it now. We'll see that later on, Bezrat Hashem, when we get there. But the point is, for our purposes now, says Rashi, Lo Dami La'arama. He says, this is not similar. Over there, later on, the Gemara is going to tell us Harama is forbidden. But it's not similar to this type of Harama. Rav Ada bar Ahava, the Malach Garma Garma. That's Agmara. The Ein Ibud Ba'ochlim. He says, the reason why we're allowing it here is at the end of the day, what is the prohibition of salting the meat? So it comes from the Malacha of tanning, of Abed, which is where we're salting the hides. So that is the main Malacha. And Rabbanan said that if you salt food, that is similar to me'abed, but that's not actually the Av Malacha. And therefore, since it's not the main Malacha, because the main Malacha, there is no ibud when it comes to food, therefore, Rabbanan were more lenient, and in this case, we're going to allow it for the sake of Simchat Yom Tov, and therefore the Harama is allowed. Okay. So that is.
Let's go back to the skin for a minute.
Yeah.
Skin is a result of a shchita on Yom Tov.
Nachon.
Correct? That's the first assumption. The second assumption is, of course, the skin itself has value to the individual who slaughtered the animal, whether he sells it afterwards or uses it himself for whatever profession he's in. It is a horrible thing, and you obviously can't take it into your house. So it must be outdoors, outside someplace. Now, what would you, if, depending especially Shavuot, it's hot already, why would you leave any meat out there and then use it later again? It doesn't make much sense in doing that. You use it as an animal to eat its meat. You probably remove everything on the spot. And the whole idea of people stepping on it and then afterwards coming back, stepping on it in itself, it shouldn't be permitted for the simple reason that it is a process in Avodata.
Yeah, but that's exactly the machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. In other words, you can shech the animal. The point is, what's allowed is for ochel nefesh. So to shech it, to get the meat, that is permitted. That's permitted according to everybody.
Right.
And
absolutely.
As you say, there's a process. You have skins, you have fats, you have other parts of the animal. Okay, it's very expensive. You're going to lose a lot of money if you can't process those parts. So Beit Shammai says, too bad. Beit Shammai says you can't do anything with it. Beit Hillel says you can perform your harama in such a way that you'll be able to perform that process without actually doing the melacha. But you do something which we wouldn't normally allow because we want people not to come and be prevented from doing shchita and Yom Tov. Nowadays, it's irrelevant. Nowadays, we don't do shchita and Yom Tov anyway. Nowadays, we go to the supermarket before, and none of us do shchita in our house, outside our house, anywhere. I remember once in the yeshiva, actually, they used to do, in the summer, Zman Kite was always the time, so there were a lot of people from Chutz La'aretz would go back early. And towards the end of the summer, they would have special programs in yeshiva. It was very, very, very empty and trying to make it a little bit exciting. One of the things they would do every year, they would learn a little bit about Hilchot Shechita. And they would do a shechita of a goat or whatever it was, and then there would be a barbecue afterwards. So then it was always a question of where could the shechita be done. I remember once there was somebody, I won't say who allowed the shechita to be done in his house. I think his wife ever spoke to him again after that. But that was that was that. All right, we're now on to the next Mishnah. So again, we're moving away from the shechita, but continuing with these machlokot, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, particularly regarding to Simchat Yom Tov. So this is another one that we've seen already. Says the Mishnah, Beit Shammai omrim ein mesalkin et trisin b'Yom Tov, uBeit Hillel matirin af lahachzir. Okay, so we're talking about these trisim. Again, and it's mat'eh, because you hear the word trisim, you think of the blinds nowadays, but they're sort of shutters on the doors and the windows, which they would have these shops. The Gemara is now going to explain precisely what it is, more or less. But again, if you imagine these big metal boards, which they would use to shut up the doors or the windows of these shops, when the shops were open, they would use the trisim as a tray on which they would place the spices and all the wares which they would sell. So Beit Shammai says, Ein misalkin et trisim b'yom tov. Beit Shammai says you cannot remove these trisim, these shutters, you cannot remove them on Yom Tov. Beit Hillel says, matirin af lachzir. Not only can you take them off, I take them off would be opening the shops, right? So that would be to allow people to come and to sell these goods and to buy and to purchase these spices and things. Obviously, you'll say to me, how can you purchase? So Rashi tells us again, we're dealing with a case where it would all be done on credit and nobody would write anything down, and that's permitted. But Beit Hillel say you could even put the trisim back, which is just to close up the shops, and that itself has no need for Simchat Yom Tov. So says the Gemara, my trisim, what precisely are these trisim? Amar Ula trisei chanuyot. Okay, Ula says these are the trisim of chanuyot. Says Rashi, these shops, kmot tevoten, v'umdot bashuk. They're like these booths, these portable boxes that they have in the shuk. Ve'enan mechubarin lakarka. They are not connected to the ground. That's very important because the melacha that we're dealing with, of the trisim, of taking them out and putting them back, is related to binyan and stira, of building or destroying. But the Gemara is going to tell us that we say generally ein binyan stira bekelim. Here it's not attached to the ground. So it's called kelim, means anything that's not connected to the ground, and therefore binyan and stira would not be, certainly not a melacha deoraita. Okay, but that's what we're talking about. Trisim, zaltot, pitcheim. So you have the entrances of these shops, there's like a door, and you have these big metal boards which they would plug up, which would be the trisim to close them. So now Ula says the following: Amar Ula, shlosha dvarim hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan. Okay, this is what we've been talking about here. Gemara spells it out that there are three things. Gemara will challenge that there's more. But there are three things, says Ula, where we allow sofan mishum tchilatan. In other words, we allow an action to be taken at the end of the process, which would have been prohibited, even though there is no reason to allow that particular action. The need has gone, but we allow it so that the beginning action will not be that you won't be prevented from doing that. So one of the places in contemporary halacha where this comes up very much, when you think about doctors and nurses and medical personnel who have to travel to the hospital on Shabbat for a shift, okay, and again, without getting into the technicalities and without getting into a halacha l'maaseh too much, but there are instances where we would say that a doctor could drive to, so certainly to drive to the hospital would be permitted because there is pikuach nefesh, you're going and working. What about driving home afterwards? So where we allow that, we would say the reason is, the main svara is, that if you don't, this applies with volunteers as well, that if you don't allow them to drive back, so then people are not going to volunteer, are not going to be able to go to the hospital, to go to the emergencies in the first place on Shabbat, and therefore they can come back. Again, there are lots of technicalities and details in terms of that, so I'm not giving a psak here, but that is the svara upon which it relies. So Ula says, what are these three cases? Rashi points out, he says, Hitiru sofan she'eno tzorech yom tov. The end, the sof, which we will allow, is not a tzorech, it's not a yom tov need, but mishum tchilatan shehu tzorech yom tov. The beginning part is a tzorech yom tov. V'lo sharet sofan. And if you aren't going to allow them to do the end either, so then lo avit tchilatan, they won't do the beginning. Now he says here that it's tzorech yom tov. We'll see, it's only the first two cases which Ula mentions, which are connected to Yom Tov. The third case is not, but let's see what the cases are. So two we've already seen. Amar Ula, shlosha dvarim mitiru sofan mishum tchilatan ve'eluhen. Or lifnei adorsan. Okay, we can't get away from it. That is the skin, right, that we're placing down to allow people to walk over. The reason that is allowed is hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan. That's case number one. Case number two is trisei chanuyot. We've just seen in our Mishnah, right? You allow people to, what's the sofan? Sofan is you allow them to close the shops, to put the trisim back, because if you didn't allow that, they wouldn't take the trisim out in the first place, okay? And the third case is chazarat retiyah b'mikdash, returning a retiyah as a sort of a bandage in the mikdash. What are we talking about there? We're talking about a kohen. Let's have a look in Rashi. Rashi spells it out for us. He says, "Bamikdash la kohen shelaka biado." You have a kohen who was injured on his hand. V'tzarich lavod avoda. And so he has to put a sort of bandage on it. But this ritiyah, the understanding is that it's sort of a bandage, has some sort of cream or ointment or something inside, which is going to be spread out when you put it on. Now he needs to perform the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash. And in order to do that, but there can't be a chatzitza. There can't be anything blocking between his hands and the avodah that he's doing. Therefore, he needs to take the bandage off in order to do the avodah. V'litol et yameh al yado. Shelo teh chatzitza ben yado la'avodah. So we say here, machzir alutiyah la'achal avodah. When he's finished performing whatever avodah it is in the Beit HaMikdash, he can put this bandage back. Lo shalit le'lachzira lo shaki le'me'ekala. If you don't allow him to put his bandage back on, right, even though there it's not necessary for the avodah, but then he's not going to take it off in the first place. Okay, what would be the problem with putting on the bandage? So the previous Rashi, he says chazarat lutiyah b'Shabbat b'perek klal gadol amru. We learn in the Gemara Masechet Shabbat, ha'memareach lutiyah b'Shabbat chayav mishum memachek. Okay, so this is the malacha of memachek, which is of smoothing out. So this ritiyah, again, it has some sort of cream or ointment on it, and when you place it on the skin, you are smoothing out that cream, and that would be a prohibition in terms of memachek. This is a question which comes up as well. Practical halacha, many types of creams and ointments, etc. The person needs to spread them on Shabbat. Generally speaking, we say sort of more thicker lotions and things like that would be more problematic. The thinner it is, if it's something which is absorbed completely in the skin, that would be permitted. Comes up sometimes, people ask the question about sun cream, etc. Places where it's very hot and you're going to go out to the sun, can you put on lotion to protect the screen, to protect the skin? If it is something which is completely absorbed, it's almost liquid, then poskim are lenient about that. But if it's something which is sort of very thick and bits of the cream are still there and you're sort of smoothing it out, that is going to be more problematic. Okay, so those are the three cases. There is a fourth case, which the Gemara gives, not according to Alef. Okay, that's a case related to if somebody opened a barrel of wine on Yom Tov and started serving it to Amaya Aret, so we assume that it's going to contract Tum'ah. But on Yom Tov itself, Chachamim made a gzerah that there is no tumah. But the question is, can you continue selling that wine afterwards? What do you do with the rest of that barrel? Okay, we will see that tomorrow. B'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
See everybody tomorrow.
Bye,
God willing.
everybody.